What's up, YouTube? I just wanted to weigh in and give my 2 cents on what seems to be an endless debate in the rock music community. You know, since I first picked up a guitar at age 13, I've heard this a gazillion times. Um, and the debate is, as a rock musician, specifically as a rock guitarist, should you or should you not learn and incorporate music theory into your playing and soloing and songwriting? You know, a lot of people cite guys like Hendrix, Eddie Van Halen, Dimebag Darrell as brilliant guitar players who use very little music theory in their playing and writing, and yet wrote some of the greatest solos and riffs of all time. A lot of people say that if you're a rock musician, it should come from the heart, and if you learn music theory, it creatively inhibits you. Now, the reason I made this video is because I fall heavily, heavily on the other side. And I just wanted to get this off my chest and explain just one man's opinion, one musician's opinion, on why it's really beneficial to know some theory as a rock musician. Something I say to everybody I meet who either wants to learn guitar. I used to teach for a while, and that's like, I would obviously preach that endlessly. So the thing about music theory, and all of its principles, it's like a language. It's like learning a new language. But in music, regardless of style, regardless of anything, music theory is a universal language. You know, jazz has got its own weird shit and everything. Every style of music has rules. You know, classical has like the Baroque voice leading rules and whatnot. But generally speaking, regardless of style, like a G chord is a G chord, whether it's a Metallica song, a Dr. Dre beat, or a jazz standard. You know, GBD is a G major chord. And what ends up happening as a musician, if you want to branch out and play with as many types of people as you can, explore as many new sounds, you have a universal common ground with whoever you jam with. You also have a common ground for writing. You know, on my solo album, I did a lot of keyboards, and I don't know what I would have done if I didn't understand voice leading and at least how chords worked. I would have been pretty fucked. But what ends up happening is it's a universal language. And it's just good to know the language in a foreign country, if we're going to use a cheesy metaphor. I know a lot of the people watching this will be dudes, so I'll use a crude one. If you want to go to Spain for a summer and try to bang as many Spanish girls as you can, yeah, if you have good game and you're a good-looking person, you can do well. I'll give you that. But imagine if you went and you knew fluent Spanish. How much better would you do? Now, I know that's completely a crude and misogynistic example, but the point is that you have kind of a universal common ground with any other musicians you play and any instruments you pick up in the future. And for me, it's been such a blessing. Like, I met a guy this summer who played jazz guitar at U Miami, and he was like, and we just felt like jamming, and even though like I'm a metal guy and whatnot, we had an awesome jam session because at least I knew what he was talking about a little bit. Those guys are nuts. The jazz players are nuts with their theory, but I knew enough, you know. But here's the main point I want to make. People say that it creatively inhibits you, like it sets rules that you can't get out of your head as you're trying to write and be wildly creative. But that is the biggest load of shit I've ever heard. It's something you can turn on and off. Music theory you can turn on and off. There's instances where it's really helpful and instances where you should just say fuck it and not worry about any theory principles. Like, but when I'm soloing, I'm not always like, oh man, this isn't like D Dorian, whatever the fuck, you know what I mean? Like, perfect example of that. Two examples of both sides. When I was 15, I was briefly in a band that played a cover version of Psychosocial by Slipknot, if anyone knows that song. That was 2010-ish, so yeah, it was a couple years after All Hope's Gone came out. And the main riff, I mean, I'm not in drop A, but it sounds something like this. Right? It's chromatic power chords. Chromatic, if you're not a theory guy, basically meaning that like there's no scale to it, it's just notes that, well, there's a chromatic scale, but that's separate. Anyway, I took the second solo spot where Jim Root usually solos. And if you think that I was thinking about music theory for 1 second while I was playing those solos, you're stupid. Like, it's just one of those metal solos that you just go for the jugular, you know, like a Jeff Hanneman kind of thing. Or, you know, it was one that didn't call for any theory. Just let's play exactly what I'm feeling. Match the rage of the riffs behind it. So that's an instance where I didn't give a shit what I was playing. I know what would have worked in with those chords, but it didn't matter. So you can turn it off. On the flip side, when I was a teenager, I went to this thing called National Guitar Workshop, which was really awesome. It was basically a summer camp for guitar nerds. It was awesome, man. Like we had some great guests, like John Petrucci came and everything. And one of the teachers there, his name was James Hogan. Awesome, amazing player. He taught the class this really cool thing, which was so if you're playing A minor pentatonic, if you take that and move a whole step up, and in the same lick, you basically get a Dorian sound, which, because you have that major 6 in the pentatonic up a whole step. So and it sounds awesome if you get the right chords behind it and everything. Playing it on an acoustic guitar doesn't do it any justice. But that's the example of something that was really thought through in terms of musical terms and sounds awesome. I can tell you, at least my experiences as a songwriter, on the album I put out a couple years ago, half the songs I was really thinking, C harmonic minor, whatever, and half of them I just was jamming. So the long-winded point is you can turn it off. It's what music theory ends up being is a series, because there's no rules to creativity. You can do whatever the fuck you want. It ends up being a series of cool tips. Like if you know that in harmonic minor the 5 chord really makes it sound, gives that evil edge, right? The Spanish sound or whatever. That just ends up being a cool tip that but the rules of music theory give you, and you just know that, and you carry that around as another trick up your sleeve. You know what I mean? So that's, to me, music theory is just a bunch of really cool guidelines that help you. It's like navigating this crazy-ass instrument. It's awesome to be able to know, based on certain chords, that some things work better than others. They just sound... And obviously, it's always an opinion. Avant-garde jazz players would say that random chromatic notes at random time signatures sound amazing, and good for them. But to me, it's really cool to have at least a series of basic guidelines to follow. But the point being that they're guidelines that I can turn on and off. I'm not always, when you're playing, like thrash metal is a great example of a style of music where you shouldn't be using a lot of theory. And that's not saying that Alex Skolnick is doing anything wrong, because he's, from Testament, the greatest guitar player in that genre ever. And it works in his solo sections, but I'm talking about the riff writing and stuff. A lot of it is just, it sounds badass, let's go with that, go with the gut, and that's awesome. And just to respond to people who make the Eddie Van Halen and Hendrix thing, that's pretty arrogant to compare yourself to Jimi Hendrix and Eddie Van Halen. I mean, good for you if you're that good. If you can come up with amazing shit like those guys did without using theory, I applaud you. But I just, those guys are freaks of nature. And the other thing with those guys is they use theory without knowing it. The same guidelines that I was just talking about a few minutes ago, they were using just without being aware of it. And it sounded good to them. And the only difference between that and knowing theory is I know why it sounds good. That's the only difference. The biggest advantage, though, like I said earlier, is just having that language and that common ground with everybody you jam with. Any time you try to collaborate in the songwriting process, I'll tell you, writing with people who don't know theory can be a pain in the ass sometimes. Usually what you end up doing is taking their idea and being like, all right, if you're trying to solo to it, for example, you basically have to figure out what that would mean in theory terms a lot of the time. Again, there's a lot of situations where, fuck it, who cares? It sounds cool. Rip it, That's the spirit of rock music, and that's where this argument comes from, is people say, you just rock out, you just, play with the rebellious, angry spirit of the music. And I'm all for that. But I'm also for giving yourself advantages on an instrument. I think knowing theory is a huge advantage for me. It's like I said, it's a bunch of really cool guidelines that I can use when I'm writing music. And who doesn't want help in one of the most daunting things in the world, which is the creative process? There's no right or wrong, so it's cool to know that, Dorian, the minor to minor 1-2 chord makes it sound Dorian. That's the Santana sound, as it were. That's pretty much it. I just wanted to make that point. It's something I really stress to people. I think it's a load of shit when you say need is a relative word. This is one person's opinion. And you don't need theory, but I think it's a load of shit to say that it's not beneficial. And it's up to you what degree you want to take it. If you want to just know the scales used in rock music, obviously the pentatonic is the first fucking shitty one that you hear every beginner play, and you still use it forever. So, if you just want to learn that and a few minor scales, that's better than nothing. If you want to go crazy with it, it can be really fucking fun. From experience, there's one really cool thing I figured out, and I put this on my album, was if you stack 2 power chords in thirds, it's on a song called Graduation Day. If you take, let's say C5 and then E5, if one guitar player plays C5 and one plays E5, you get a major 7 sound, because you have stuff like that is really fun if you're more of a nerdy type to kind of play around with that stuff. But devil's advocate, don't be rigid. Yeah, it's not good to be a rigid person and say, I'm going to be C5 over, I'm a music minor in college, and I take all the classical classes, chromatic, harmony, and whatnot, and that's pretty rigid, man. It's like, the tests are like math tests. Like, there's right or wrong, which I think is fucked up. It's the creative process. Like, voice leading is like, for example, if you're doing 4-part voice leading, if the bass moves up half a step, the top 3 voices have to move down. Or if, it's just, there's rules. And I think that's fucked up. But as a rock guitar player, it's been awesome knowing theory. Also, to be honest, Van Halen, Hendrix, Dimebag Darrell are legends. But for me personally, a lot of the really amazing guitar players, all my favorites, do know theory. Kiko Loureiro, John Petrucci, Ollie Herbert, Alex Skolnick. A lot of the really, really, truly incredible players I've met do know theory. But obviously I'm not making a distinction. I'm just saying it's a really helpful thing, and it's really cool if you can learn some theory and incorporate it into rock music. It gives you a nice balance and a nice new set of tools to use in your songwriting.